Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 111 Gunshot. Same here, pretty boy. Liang Peng chuckled before remarking in a playful tone, by the way, I honestly think you should forget about that ice girl and find yourself a hot girl. Don't you think it's better? Chen He blushed in embarrassment and kicked him, go to hell man. Liang Peng laughed loudly before looking at the indifferent Shangguan Bing Shui, who didn't seem to have any kind of reaction to his previous words. She nodded slightly and said nothing more. That was her farewell greeting. Well, I guess that's already good coming from you. Liang Peng shook his head and said without knowing whether to laugh or cry, if you had said some nice words to me, I would have thought you were actually secretly cursing me. Without another word, Liang Peng turned around and walked back to the bus he had gotten off, which also had 70 to 80 survivors inside. 3 days ago, when the group learned that they would not all be going the same way, Xietain and the rest made an announcement that some would be traveling south while others would be going north. The survivors with family in the northern part of Ruilin City quickly stood up and expressed that they wanted to follow Liang Peng in order to find their families, which amounted to just under 100. As to whether their families were alive or not, that was unknown, but hopes were not particularly high. In addition to the bus with survivors, a second bus loaded with supplies such as meat, mutated beast meat, rice grains, noodles, pure water, and some small luxuries such as milk, also started its engines. As one of the main leaders who had been fighting constantly since day one and who had obtained a large amount of supplies, Liang Peng naturally had the right to take a considerable share, and Xietain was not so cruel to take everything from a person with whom he had fought shoulder to shoulder. Soon, the two buses departed with one behind and one in front, slowly moving away in a northerly direction. As the two buses disappeared from his line of sight, Xietain announced, "We should start moving too. We have a lot of work to do yet." The rest agreed and quickly all boarded their respective buses, except Chen He, who stood for a few more seconds looking off into the distance before departing as well. Soon, the engines of the 8 buses started up and the now smaller caravan began to move in the opposite direction from where the previous 2 buses had left, directly moving south of Ruilin City. As to whether the bus leaders would ever meet again, that was still unknown. In this new world, it was difficult to know if people would have the opportunity to meet again someday. The streets near the university were a total mess, with crashed cars and collapsed light poles along with various building debris. Therefore, even after riding for half an hour, the buses had not made much progress. On several occasions, the group had to stop the engines to move obstacles out of the way, such as moving cars off the road. As for this, Xietain also made sure to have a group of survivors get off the buses under the protection of Fu Xiefeng and the rest before starting to empty the gas tanks, thus filling bottles and gallons of fuel. At present, with work at a complete standstill, fuel was as valuable a commodity as the food. 1 drop less of fuel meant that there was 1 drop that could not be recovered in any way, and while it was already a non-renewable energy, this had worsened by thousands of levels with the coming of the end of the world. After traveling approximately 50 kilometers south, the 8 buses stopped at the roadside, right in front of 4 convenience stores and a large trucking company. Kai Jingyi, Kong Lan, take a group of people to collect anything you find useful or that may be useful in the future inside the convenience stores. Xietain ordered before telling Fu Xiefeng and Zhongde to stay outside guarding the survivors and guarding the buses. The 2 women nodded and quickly went to delegate the job. On the other hand, Xietain in the company of Shangguan Bing Shui, Chen He, and Wu Yijuan went into the trucking firm to look for as large a cargo truck as possible that would suit this new world. The buses were good for transporting people, but they were definitely not good for carrying supplies. Besides, the snakes hanging from the roof were too conspicuous and could attract unwanted attention or trouble that could easily be avoided. The group searched for about half an hour as the place was really big, with all kinds of trucks, tanker trucks, small cargo trucks, ladder trucks, etc. Occasionally groups of zombies dressed in blue with hats and name tags on their chests would appear, indicating that when the soul record arrived on Earth, these people were at work and could not withstand the wave of mana entering their bodies, turning them into mindless mutations that only knew how to wander everywhere. Even before these zombies could get too close, Chen He did a great job with his crossbow, killing almost all of them. The reason he left some alive was because they all wanted the beautiful and seductive Wu Yijun to level up so she could become more powerful and use her skill properly, becoming a great asset to the group as a whole. Gradually she killed zombies, slowly increasing her level. Over the past 3 days, Shangguan Bing Shui had taken her hunting around the university, which helped her raise her level to 8. Although she was still weak, she was many times more powerful than in the past, and with a little effort and time she could catch up, or at the very least, strong enough to not be a burden, as she referred to herself. This one will do. Bai Zemin nodded in satisfaction as he arrived in front of a huge cargo truck with a giant box in the back. Not only was the box firmly closed by 2 large doors, but the front had a powerful bumper capable of withstanding the constant impact of zombies that came across the road. Although some changes had to be made and modified so that it could circulate like the buses, temporarily this Dongfang truck was the best there was in this place. While they were at it, a gunshot sound suddenly rang out from outside and everyone's face abruptly changed. Bang! Damn it! Bai Zemin cursed and rushed towards the exit like a whirlwind. Clearly, something was going on. If one of the people he was nurturing died when they were not yet fully grown, it would be a great loss to him, especially Conlan. Her lesser healing skill was something that Bai Zemin needed because even though he was strong, in a battle to the death he knew perfectly well that injuries would be inevitable. Shangguan Bing Shui and the rest quickly followed from behind. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 112 Yang Pei. On the 3rd floor of a bungalow, a group of more than 15 people was gathered in silence. Some of them were simply sitting down, others were leaning against the wall, and 2 of them were crouched by the window with binoculars looking off into the distance. What was most surprising was that although the group clearly had no special training, there were 5 of them carrying Type 54 pistols with 15 rounds of ammunition each. As for the rest, some had bats, steel pipes, watermelon cutting knives, machetes, and other melee weapons. It's been almost 15 minutes, but those guys who went in haven't come out. A bearded, burly man pointed out without taking his eyes off the group of survivors working. The other man next to him turned the binoculars to the buses and said with a tinge of alarm, "Still, this group is definitely not simple. Those scary-looking snakes were hunted by them and the buses were modified with a material I can't recognize from here." The bearded man snorted and licked his lips before chuckling, "They may not be simple. But can they survive a bullet? Remember, Boss Yang came with us this time. Besides, I haven't touched a beauty for over a week and I'm already getting a little impatient. Aren't you the same, Luocheng?" Luocheng hesitated but in the end, remained silent. In fact, it had been a while since he felt the warmth of a woman, and all the women in the group who were at the base were not too pretty if compared to the young female students with lithe bodies in the group of survivors a few streets away. As for the prettier ones, they all belonged to the leaders of the group, so little punks like them would never stand a chance with them unless they were willing to die the next second. Suddenly, the door opened and a young man of about 24 years old who dressed like a hooligan entered the room, silencing everyone inside for a moment before they all stood up. Boss Yang, M. Yang Pei casually nodded as he casually chewed on a piece of gum before walking over to the window and roughly grabbing one of the binoculars. The bearded man, Zhang Hu, dared not show the slightest displeasure and stood silently as he looked at Yang Pei watching in the distance. After a minute or two, Yang Pei threw the binoculars at the burly man and said with a smile that was not a smile, "I just saw some little beauties over there. After taking the ones I like and leaving others for the other bosses, you guys can have fun." The small group perked up immediately and everyone's eyes sparkled. Even if the other group had over 300 people, they hadn't seen any firearms with them, so they weren't worried. A single Type 54 pistol was enough to dissuade dozens of people, and 5 of them were certainly enough to dissuade a few hundred. In addition, the other group was composed of people who had not seen cruelty. This was obvious since they all had bright faces, and none seemed to have been through hardship. Such a group filled with hothouse flowers could never stand against the terror of a storm. Remember, shoot as few as possible so as not to waste ammunition. We didn't bring so many bullets or weapons for this mission since we were only supposed to take supplies from these 4 convenience stores. Yang Pei barked before walking towards the exit and saying, "If anyone moves, goes wild, or doesn't obey, just kill them to warn the others that we're not playing around." The 15 or so men had a glint of madness in their eyes and quickly followed Yang Pei before boarding some 4x4 pickup trucks and off-road jeeps. While Xietain and the rest were clearing the hazards inside the truck company, blocking the road and looking for a new transport needed for the group, Kai Jingyi and Kong Lan were looking after the survivors who were working hard to move as many supplies as possible towards the entrance. Even the small cigarette packs were not spared and were moved as well. Across the street, Fu Xiefeng and Zhong De were checking on the survivors who had not been chosen to work this time or who simply continued to maintain their non-working attitude. To avoid major problems, they simply forbade them to get off the buses and made them wait in their seats with order. Little by little, cardboard boxes filled to the brim with packages of noodles, rice, bottles of water, salt, sugar, milk, candy, cookies, and many other foods began to pile up one by one next to the 4 convenience stores. While it might seem like a lot at first glance, the reality was that considering the sheer number of people, all the food they were taking out of the stores could last at most a month before it was completely depleted. After all, properly feeding nearly 400 people was not a simple task to scoff at. Jingyi, how strong do you think Xietain really is? Kong Lan asked to the girl next to her. Through her glasses, her dark eyes seemed to glint with intelligence as she carefully observed the surroundings. Kai Jingyi thought for a moment before shaking her head. I don't know. Even though I've been adding every point in agility and stamina each time I level up, I can't catch up to his agility. Even though I have my dagger that increases my agility greatly when he fully bursts, I can barely see his shadow flashing. The 2 girls had become close to each other after deciding to follow in Xietan's footsteps. When they were still in university, they often went out to hunt zombies and some other creatures to level up and improve their strength, creating a strong bond of companionship between them. Suddenly, the sound of several engines roaring from a distance and rapidly approaching alerted everyone. Zhong De's face changed slightly and he hurriedly shouted, Kong Lan, Kai Jingyi. Have the workers hide inside the stores and don't come out. Kong Lan's face also changed and she ordered, everyone, inside and don't come out until told to do otherwise. In the past, she was shy like a turtle that dared not stick its head out of its shell. She was always alone, lost in her own books. However, after half a month of killing hundreds and hundreds of zombies as well as other mutated animals, Kong Lan had gained more self-confidence and her words no longer faltered in moments of gravity. She was a smart woman, and even though they had not yet encountered any more survivors, the case of Qiao Long was still fresh in her memory. No, not only her, everyone remembered it clearly and knew that sometimes, humans were the worst enemy. Survivors who were moving boxes of food and other supplies turned pale at the sound of the order and the approaching engines. Without hesitation, they all ran into the stores and hid while looking out with terror-filled eyes. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 113, Confrontation and Death. The apprehension that Zhong De and Kong Lan felt and that soon spread to the rest of the survivors proved to have a valid reason after all. For 4x4 pickup trucks followed by 2 modified jeeps raced by at full speed before noisily braking, stopping in front and at the rear, blocking the bus's path to impede their escape. Immediately after, 15 men with all kinds of weapons descended from the vehicles and surrounded the 8 buses. Several of them had hair dyed yellow, green, blue, and other bright colors, while others were wild-looking middle-aged men. At the sight of the 15 new arrivals who clearly had no good intentions, the survivors inside the buses and convenience stores became frightened. None of them dared to make the slightest sound for fear of attracting too much attention and looked at Kai Jingyi and the rest with hope. They were what the survivors could rely on at the moment. Everyone! Get off the damn buses! A fat man with several acne marks on his face approached one of the buses and shouted loudly as he swung his bat at the shell of the blazing beetle that protected most of the vehicle. 7 other men approached the other buses and began viciously beating the vehicles with the weapons in their hands as they bellowed and cursed, terrifying the survivors even more. Zhong De frowned and was about to step forward, but the burly man pointed the muzzle of his gun, forcing him to stop immediately. I'd advise you not to play the hero here, big guy. The burly man named Nya who sneered, I know several of you are strong enough to be able to hunt these monsters here, and we probably won't be your opponents. However, I don't think you can dodge a bullet, can you? Even if the people in this group had the strength to hunt those terrifying snakes, they were still human. A bullet was enough to end the life of any of them or injure them. At the very least, a gun was enough to keep them at bay. This was what everyone thought, and in fact, it was not wrong. Although Zhong De and the rest were much stronger than a normal human, a shot in the head meant the end of the game. Even Bai Zemin would die if he was shot in the head or heart. With Zhong De forced to stop, another armed man approached Kai Jingyi and Kong Lan. The man looked at both women with obvious obscene desire in his eyes and licked his lips as he said with a hint of regret, "Too bad I won't be able to play with any of you, little beauties. At least not until the bosses get bored of your bodies, hee." The gunman stretched a hand forward with the intention of grabbing Kong Lan's chest, while two other gunmen watched the scene with amusement, pointing their guns at the two girls as if to intimidate them with their presence. Kong Lan's face changed as she did not expect these people to be so brazen and bold. She took a step back, evading the man's grip before pointing her index finger at him. "Don't touch me, you filthy pig." Before the man could react, a magic circle appeared on the tip of Kong Lan's finger and a dark green cloud completely enveloped him and one of his colleagues. The green cloud only lasted a second before it vanished completely. However, the two men who were previously standing with smiles on their faces were now lying on the ground on their backs. Their previously smiling and confident faces were now filled with disbelief, and the color of their skin had a strange-looking greenish tint on it, giving them a terrible appearance. The man who, fortunately for him, was a meter or two behind and managed to escape the range of Kong Lan's magical skill, turned as pale as a sheet and raised his gun. "Bitch." Seeing this, Kai Jingyi immediately lunged forward and pushed Kong Lan to the ground. Only a split second later, there was an explosion that echoed everywhere. The survivors inside the bus screamed in fright, and Kong Lan's face turned pale with fear, as if it wasn't for Kai Jingyi's quick reaction she might have died. "Ugh." Kai Jingyi frowned and looked at her left arm with pain in her eyes. Although she had managed to avoid a fatal injury and had saved Kong Lan, the bullet still impacted against her left arm and pierced it from side to side. The gunman took aim again, preparing to fire. However, to his utter disbelief, he felt a sharp pain in his chest that forced him to stop his movements. There, he saw a weak-looking hand holding a knife, stabbing right into his heart. With wide eyes filled with panic, the gunman raised his head and saw that, at some unnoticed moment, a young man with glasses as thin as a matchstick had appeared. A second later, the life disappeared from the man's eyes and he fell heavily backward. Of course, this person was precisely Fu Xiefeng, who had hidden with his level 5 stealth skill as soon as he noticed trouble. Fu Xiefeng took a deep breath and looked at his first human kill with complicated eyes. Although he knew it would end up happening since he decided to follow Bai Zemin, it felt strange to know that his once innocent hands now carried the life of a person, and his own soul power contained the soul power of another human being. The events happened in a matter of seconds, and the other men couldn't even react when 3 of them had already died at enemy hands. Little bastards. The burly man, Nyahu, who was aiming at Zhong De, shouted to shake off the fear he felt and took aim with his gun, before firing 2 shots in a row. However, Nyahu was so scared that both shots missed miserably. Before a third shot could be fired, Zhong De activated his power boost skill and rushed forward. "Go to hell." Bang! With a strong punch charged with over 50 strength points, Nyahu's head popped into meat paste and his body hit the ground noisily. In less than 5 seconds, 4 of the 5 gunmen were dead at the hands of a group of 4 students who 2 weeks ago would not even have had the courage to resist a single Type 54 pistol. Just when they thought they had the upper hand and were about to begin a counterattack, a lazy, arrogant voice sounded from inside one of the pickup trucks. "Really crap. For loaded guns and they can't control a couple of kids? They better be dead, or this old man would shove a stick up their asses until they scream like mules." Yang Pei, with pierced ears and dyed red hair, walked lazily and looked at the guns on the ground. As long as the weapons were there, the death of the gunman was no problem. At the base, there were dozens, if not hundreds of people willing to fight if given a weapon. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 114, Summons. "Little beauty, you sure are dangerous." Yang Pei looked at Kong Lan, ignoring the rest, and scanned her body up and down as he said, "How about you become my woman? Not only will I respect you, but you will also have the right to participate in important decisions with your strength." Without waiting for a reply, he looked at Kai Jingyi and nodded. You seem to be quite quick and your reaction is good. You can also be mine. Are you retarded? Zhong De barked, tired of so much nonsense, and abruptly rushed forward with the intention of putting an end to the whole charade. The ground beneath his feet cracked slightly due to his explosive power, and taking advantage of the strength on his feet, his speed exploded for a moment. Yang Pei snorted and quickly stepped back while muttering some strange words. A second later, 2 magic rings appeared on the ground in front of him, and in a flash of light 2 creatures came out. One was a wild-looking brown bear that was over 2 meters tall even on its 4 legs. Its eyes were blood red and its front paws looked especially formidable, as if it could crush a rock with one swipe. The other was a white wolf whose fur was as pure as snow except that its nose was spotted with black. Its eyes were blood red like the bear's and its teeth were as sharp as razor blades, giving the illusion of being able to cut through any defense. When Zhong De saw the 2 beasts, he was surprised, but because he was in the middle of a charge, had no way to stop. Therefore, he exploded with more strength and punched fiercely forward with both fists. The brown bear roared ferociously and stood up on its hind legs before dropping down with all its weight. Boom! When Zhong De's 2 fists connected with the brown bear's 2 front paws, there was a small explosion before the winner of the clash was decided. Although Zhong De had already reached level 16 and his strength was incomparable to the past, he was still slightly below Yang Pei's summoning. He was forced to retreat 5 steps back before he finally regained his balance and looked at the brown bear in surprise. However, the brown bear did not give him too much time to think as it immediately charged forward and attacked again. Damn it! Zhong De gritted his teeth and began to fight against the brown bear, engaging in a fierce melee using his fists and legs to attack. Swoosh! Suddenly, the air behind Yang Pei shook slightly and Fu Xiefeng appeared with his knife still stained with blood. Now that he had already killed once, and given the circumstances he didn't mind adding 1 more kill to the count. However, the wolf suddenly howled and looked in his direction as its nose twitched before lunging at a speed that rivaled his own. If Fu Xiefeng continued his attack, then the wolf would be able to injure him, and while it was true that Yang Pei was the prime mover, which meant that his death marked the vanishing of the summons, Fu Xiefeng had no real combat experience and the fear of pain and death was still present. With no other choice, he stopped his attack and quickly began to fight with the summoned wolf. Both were fast, blinking constantly and trying to take the advantage. However, Fu Xiefeng was just a notch faster, which allowed him not to lose against the savage beastliness of the white wolf. Before Yang Pei could say anything, Kai Jingyi gritted her teeth and ignored the pain in her bleeding arm. With her Agarth dagger firmly gripped in her right hand, she appeared in front of him in just 2 seconds and stabbed mercilessly into his heart. She obviously intended to end her enemy's life and had not even hesitated for a second before doing so. Yang Pei's face turned ugly as he did not expect this group of people to be so powerful that they could resist his summoning for so long. Although his summons were strong, mana's consumption was terrifying. He could only sustain both beasts for a couple of minutes at most before losing his mana completely. You really don't leave me any more options, little bitches. Yang Pei pulled out a Type 54 pistol from his waist and aimed it at Kan Lan. Although he wanted to keep her to himself, he had no choice but to kill her for him to survive. It wasn't like it was the first time he had done something like killing women anyway. Kai Jingyi's face changed and quickly turned around, wanting to rescue Kan Lan once again. However, although her agility was high, she didn't have time to get there. Bang! The sound of the gunshot thundered out and Kai Jingyi turned pale as if she had seen a ghost in broad daylight. She knew that in terms of value, Kan Lan was the most important to Bai Zemin since she had the ability to heal if something happened to her. Who knew how he would react when he returned? However, what happened was even more surprising. Right in front of Kan Lan, who was also as pale as a sheet, a wall of ice rose up. The low-caliber bullet hit the wall and left a small white mark without being able to do anything else before falling to the ground with a clink. Lucky. Kan Lan muttered before sitting down on the ground in fright. She could no longer stand upright. Kai Jingyi also sighed in relief and unconsciously relaxed, which caused the pain in her left arm to increase several notches. Yang Pei's face changed completely when he saw the ice wall and realized that the gunshots surely alerted the people who were still inside. He had thought that the people outside were the real deal, but when he saw how hard the ice wall was, he was terrified to discover that he might have made a mistake. Hastily, he ordered his summons to return to protect him. However, how could Zhongde and Fu Shifeng let him do whatever he wanted? "Now you are really dead, you son of a bitch," Zhongde shouted as he forced the brown bear to stay in place, not letting it go to help its master. Fu Shifeng did the same to the white wolf, suffering a few scratches in the process, but firmly enduring. While Zhongde was fighting the brown bear, suddenly a magic circle appeared on the ground and an earthen spike rose up. The tip of the spike pierced the bear's body and lifted it into the air 2 meters above the ground before the beast let out a roar of pain and disappeared as if it had never been there. On the other hand, the wind whistled and 2 mana arrows struck the white wolf that was entangled with Fu Shifeng. The wolf howled in pain, and just like the brown bear's body, it burst like an air balloon and disappeared from this world. The 2 summons were connected to Yang Pei himself, so after being killed, he also suffered a hard backlash and ended up coughing out 2 mouthfuls of fresh blood. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 115, 4 Big Bosses Camp, Part 1. Yang Pei staggered slightly and his face turned pale due to the aftershock of his skill. His first order summoning skill level 2 was powerful enough to allow him to take on several evolved ones at the same time. This was obvious from how he alone was able to fight the group of 3. Summoning allowed him to currently summon up to 2 creatures that had the same level as him, consuming 1 mana points per summon every 5 seconds. Therefore, it was a skill that Yang Pei could not keep active for a long time, 1 or 2 minutes at most, but this time was enough for him to slaughter most of his enemies, as he had done until today. However, his skill was a double-edged sword, as when one of his summons was completely overwhelmed, he received the remaining damage as a consequence, just as had just happened. Yang Pei saw 2 women and a man with a crossbow approaching from inside the facility. Although the women were incredibly beautiful, Yang Pei was not in the mood to joke around like before. But to his utter terror, a voice rang out from just behind him. "Jingyi, are you okay?" As he hurriedly turned around, was startled to see that at some point he didn't notice, a young man in his early 20s had appeared a few meters away. I am fine. Thank you." Kai Jingyi nodded and accepted Bai Zemin's help to sit comfortably on one of the bus steps. Although there were still 10 or 11 hooligans surrounding the buses, they only had bladed weapons and had no power to do anything. Even though some of them had evolved, they were only level 2 or 3 at most and without any striking ability, so in the previous battle, they could only watch from the side. When Bai Zemin approached with Kai Jingyi, they all stepped back with pale faces and did not dare to say anything. After all, not only was the current situation extremely unfavorable, but the young man in front of them had appeared out of nowhere as if he was a ghost. Bai Zemin ignored everyone around him and gently stroked the shy Kai Jingyi's hair and praised, "You did a great job." Although he had not seen the unfolding of events, he was smart enough to judge that the girl beside him had been injured to protect someone weaker. Considering that the survivors were covered and Zhongde was fighting the bear, only Kong Lan remained. After all, Kong Lan had focused 100% on the path of magic, unlike Shangguan Bing Shui, who could use her ice skill to fight in different ways. Kong Lan timidly approached and lowered her head in embarrassment. "Jingyi, I'm sorry. Because of me you." Kai Jingyi smiled sweetly, ignoring the pain, and shook her head gently. "It's okay. An arm wound is nothing compared to the death of a friend. Besides, the bullet went in and out, so it's no big deal." Bai Zemin couldn't help but pat the shy but brave girl on the head. "Kong Lan, heal Jingyi with your skill." Kong Lan didn't even hesitate and immediately cast her skill twice on Kai Jingyi's injury, just that this time her face didn't turn pale like in the past. After all, the current Kong Lan had already reached level 15. The blood immediately stopped flowing and the tissues began to regenerate at frightening speeds. Although the wound was still there as well as the pain, 2 or 3 days would once again leave the skin on her arm as perfect as it always was. Bai Zemin turned around and looked coldly at Yang Pei before he began to walk step by step in his direction without saying a word. To him, his subordinates were valuable to the extent that he was nurturing them with treasures and skills. However, in a matter of minutes, they were all close to being killed. While it was good for them to experience life and death battles like this to gain experience, if just one of them was killed, it would be a great loss for Bai Zemin. especially Kong Lan. Even now he had not seen a second person obtain a healing skill like her and with such high magic and mana stats compared to a normal person. Although Bai Zemin did not speak and only walked, Yang Pei could feel as if a wild beast was watching him and immediately raised his gun to shoot. This was because his summoning skill could not be activated again until 10 minutes after the summonings were killed. However, before he could pull the trigger, the wind whistled and the gun in his hands was sent flying by an arrow. When Yang Pei stepped back in fright, he saw the young man with the crossbow looking at him indifferently. Just as the young punk was about to look forward again, a hand shot out at full speed and grabbed him by the throat before slowly lifting him off the ground. "Be bastard." He barely managed to mutter those words between his teeth as he struggled with all his strength. Yang Pei's fists and kicks landed hard on Bai Zemin's body, making small bangs. However, to the young punk's terror, none of his blows caused his enemy's expression to change in any way, let alone being able to break free from his grip. Suddenly, Bai Zemin kicked twice without warning, and the sound of bones breaking echoed everywhere, followed by a painful choked scream. Thud. Yang Pei's body was casually thrown to the ground and the young punk writhed in pain as he howled at the sight of his legs twisted at an impossible angle. "Don't worry, I will soon continue to entertain you." Bai Zemin spoke for the first time before punching and knocking him out easily. Without his summoning skill, Yang Pei was simply crap in front of Bai Zemin. In fact, even with his skill, the difference would not be noticeable due to the difference in power between the two sides. Bai Zemin looked at the approximately 11 gang members with bladed weapons and picked up the Type 54 pistol that previously belonged to Yang Pei. "Everyone on your knees, now," he ordered in a deep voice as he pointed the gun forward. Kong Lan, Fu Xiefeng, Zhong De, and even Kai Jingyi had picked up the other 4 guns and aimed at the enemies coldly. The 4 of them had already killed humans and had witnessed how, if not for timely help, they might all be dead. This convinced them even more that what they were doing was the right thing to do. Being pointed at by guns, the 11 gang members had no choice but to kneel obediently, waiting to see what kind of treatment they would receive. Bai Zemin looked at a middle-aged man with a shaved head and asked coldly, "Who are you? Why did you target us? Where did you come from, Pei? Do you want me to talk and rat on the others? Forget you little bitch." The middle-aged man spat on the ground and looked at him defiantly. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 116 4 Big Bosses Camp, Part 2 Last. Wu Yujin could not help but look at the middle-aged man who had just pronounced those words with a hint of sympathy. It wasn't just her, practically every survivor present knew that Bai Zemin was by no means a saint. Bai Zemin looked at the phlegm on the ground for a second before looking the bald man straight in the eye. "How honorable of you." He didn't even hesitate and with a bang the head of the militant exploded. Pieces of broken skull along with chunks of flesh and blood flew across the ground, causing the timid survivors to let out groans of terror as they looked at the scene from the buses and from inside the convenience stores. He could not help but frown. Even now he could not completely agree with Bai Zemin's methods as he had a strong sense of justice from the way he was raised since childhood. However, although he was relatively fair, he was neither pedantic nor stupid. Since before the apocalypse he already knew that society was rotten. There were even cases in which he knew about politicians, policemen, or military officers who, as long as it did not cross a certain threshold, were willing to carry out certain assignments or orders that went against the established rules. Seeing the militant's death, the rest of the gang was shocked and could not help but look at the young man in front of them in a new light. Although he was only in his early 20s, he hadn't even blinked when he pulled the trigger. Bai Zemin pointed the gun at another militant and asked coldly, "Who are you? Why did you point at us? Where do you come from? I will speak. I'll fucking speak. Don't shoot me." Bai Zemin's target this time turned out to be Luocheng, who had been monitoring the group from a distance with binoculars. Luocheng was already sweating cold bullets seeing the deaths of the other militants, so when he felt the gunmetal right above his head, he didn't even hesitate and agreed to speak all he knew. He was not a heroic warrior by any means and feared death. The burly man who had been monitoring the group from a distance next to Luocheng suddenly shouted loudly, "Luocheng, none of the bosses have treated you badly, but you are going to betray them? Aren't you afraid that they will throw your younger sister to the soldiers to have fun with her?" Xietain didn't even let him continue saying another word before he changed his aim to the head of that burly man and pulled the trigger. Seeing the death of the burly man who had stood up, the other gang members did not dare to utter the slightest sound for fear of being next and having their heads blown off by a bullet. If any of you want to continue to be loyal and honorable to your good bosses, then come out now. I will give you all the opportunity to continue to be loyal until the last moment and die a death worthy of a brave warrior. None of them dared to stand up or highlight and quickly lowered their heads like timid chickens. There was not even one of them who wanted to be the next target of the Type 54 pistol. Xietain ignored them and pulled Luocheng away from the group before putting the barrel of the gun back on Luocheng's head. Now you can start to speak. If you dare to lie to me, if you dare to hide information, if you dare to give even one wrong name, I will bang your brains out. I have 8 others like you here, and I don't think all 8 of you are willing to die for honor. Luocheng nodded quickly as he sweated and began to spill the beans one after another without stopping. Although he was worried about his younger sister's future, he had to survive to protect her first, or else nothing would make sense. Now that his life was in someone else's hands, he had to adapt to the rules of the other person's game. That was the way the world worked now. Luocheng and the rest were part of a gang called 4 Big Bosses Camp. At the beginning of the apocalypse, there were too many zombies and chaos had broken out everywhere when people's pets suddenly turned on their owners and started slaughtering them all. Zombies did not fear bullets and did not know the meaning of pain, while many evolved animals were even more terrifying, as many were impervious to bullets, ferocious beyond belief, and aggressive in nature. Compared to zombies and evolved beasts, normal humans were simply too weak. At that time, 4 people suddenly appeared southeast of Ruilin City, about 50 kilometers from here. These 4 people were part of a gang in the past, but somehow acquired powerful skills and also had some firearms with them, thus saving the lives of many people. These 4 people were Yiqigong, Lei Su, Du Meng, and the currently out of action Yang Pei. At first, the 4 acted somewhat restrained, and although they abused their powers, also protected the weak. They cleared a small village of zombies and killed several evolved animals, creating a relatively safe area for the currently over 700 people to get some rest. However, when no police or government support showed up after almost a week, things began to change. The 4 bosses began to feel the pressure due to the lack of food, and in a fit of anger began to abuse several women no matter how much they screamed or cried. The 4 bosses gathered several men willing to do anything to get some food in their stomachs and raided the local police station, obtaining a small supply of weapons. After arming approximately 50 men, they began to clear the surrounding area, killing zombies and obtaining some supplies in the process. With the firearms and supplies under their control, the other survivors could only obey no matter how cruel the 4 bosses' orders were. Currently, the village was living under total oppression, and there was no hope at all in that place. According to Luocheng, the target they were aiming at this time was these 4 convenience stores, and they only came across them by accident. The reason they raided them was not only to steal the supplies, but also because there were many young and beautiful women, which could become a great merit if they presented them to the bosses. Yang Pei himself drooled over them. So, you're telling me that for 4 small convenience stores, one of these 4 bosses personally moved in? Xietain shook his head and laughed coldly. It's the truth. I swear. I don't know anything else. Luocheng was scared and cried out in terror as his body shook non-stop. Xietain looked at him indifferently before saying in a deep voice, Zhong de, Fu Xiefeng. Take 2 of these guys away and see if you can get some information. If what Luocheng was completely true, it would soon come out, and in case anything didn't match, any of the 3 who lied would be executed immediately. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 117, Surrender. Fu Xiefeng and Zhong de casually dragged 2 other militants and took them to separate locations. Although the 2 hooligans were frightened and tried to resist unconsciously, with the strength of 2 evolvers, they had no way to break free. In fact, the 2 militants were so scared after seeing the death of their comrades that Fu Xiefeng and Zhong de did not even have to pressure or beat them to make them speak, as immediately spilled out all the information they knew. After a conversation lasting several minutes, Xietain and the rest came to the conclusion that none of the 3 seemed to be lying. Although there were slight changes in the words they said for obvious reasons, the core of the information remained the same. Bai Zemin approached the frightened Luo Qing and threw his Xianyuan sword to the ground before pointing to another militant. If you want to live, then kill him and I will allow you to join us. Luo Qing's face changed slightly upon hearing his words, as he clearly understood what the young man in front of him meant. If he killed a member of his group, then it meant that he was willing to leave the four big bosses' camp. After all, it would be impossible for him to return because he would be branded as a traitor immediately, since he would not even be able to explain how he alone managed to survive in the face of a calamity, but Yang Pei did not. In short, if Luo Qing killed the militant, it really meant that he would be joining Bai Zemin's group completely and without return. In the end, under the terrified eyes of the militant singled out by Bai Zemin, Luo Qing gritted his teeth and picked up the sword. Before the militant could have a chance to say anything, Luo Qing mercilessly slashed and decapitated him. Blood flew everywhere and the militant's head rolled on the ground. His eyes were still wide open, filled with disbelief and hate. The hidden survivors cried out scared, and some of the militants directly peed their pants without being able to control their own bodies. Wu Yijuan and Chen He, who still had no blood on their hands, quickly turned around with pale faces. Even Fu Xiefeng, Kai Jingyi, Zhong De, and Kong Lan, who had killed before, could not help but turn slightly pale at the bloody scene. Only Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bing Shui remained without noticeable changes in their facial expressions. Luo Qing put the sword on the ground and knelt down before bowing. Luo Qing is willing to work for you. I just hope you will help me take care of my little sister. She's only 9 years old and can't protect herself. Bai Zemin waved his hand and said indifferently, as long as you are honest and don't give me trouble on purpose, you will naturally be treated as a subordinate with rights. I will personally take care of protecting your family, and if anyone dares to even harm a strand of your little sister's hair, I will make that person regret it in hell. Thank you, thank you. Luo Qing bowed profusely and thanked from the bottom of his heart. Although the fear was lingering and the insecurity towards the future was still there, he had no choice but to believe and wait to see if the young man in front of him would keep his word. The rest of the militants looked at Bai Zemin fearfully before one suddenly stood up slowly. Boss, I, Xiao Min, am willing to work for you. Bai Zemin looked at him before casually pointing to another militant. If you want to follow me, then kill him. Xiao Min did not hesitate as he picked up the sword and decapitated his former comrade, bathing in his blood as if he were a demon from hell. In the end, Bai Zemin gained a total of 4 more subordinates. The rest of the militants were decapitated on the spot and their blood pooled together with their corpses, forming a small pool of blood on the road. The reason why Bai Zemin had no qualms about killing these people was because they were all not good birds. If his group had been on the losing side, all of these men would probably have started beating or killing men while physically abusing female students and teachers. It was also for this reason that Shangguan Bing Shui did not try to stop him, and for the same reason, Chen He did not complain even though he did not agree with his methods. Only those who are willing to die have the right to kill. It was a phrase that Bai Zemin was quite fond of and applied in this case. Since the militants had bad intentions towards them, then they had to bear the consequences for failing. Because he still did not trust the 4 new recruits, Bai Zemin left them under the care of Fu Xiefeng and the rest. With guns in their hands, and being considerably high-level evolved, they would have no problem handling 4 people even if they wanted to go wild. The survivors continued to empty the convenience stores since work had been interrupted by the arrival of the militants. On the other hand, Chen He looked at the Type 54 pistol in his hands with fondness because although it was not his preferred choice, with that firearm he felt 1,000 times more comfortable. With Chen He's marksmanship and ability, a small caliber pistol could be even more terrifying than a heavy machine gun in the hands of a novice. As for Bai Zemin, he was currently inside a small bungalow a few streets away. If something happened, with his agility he would be able to arrive on the scene in a matter of seconds to provide support. The reason he moved away was that he needed some privacy for what he was going to do next. Bai Zemin crouched down and looked at the unconscious Yang Pei for a moment. He made a deep cut on the chest of the young man who was about the same age as him, and seeing that he still did not wake up, he threw a handful of salt into the wound. The result was immediate. Yang Pei's eyes opened immediately, as big as 2 saucers. His face distorted like that of a terrifying monster, and a roar of pain broke through his throat, bursting through the walls and going beyond. He looked at Bai Zemin and barked like a wounded beast, "You bastard! I'll cut you into 1,000 pieces and feed you to the pigs." 2 magic circles flashed on the ground and 2 white wolves came out from inside. The 2 summoned beasts seemed to be able to sense their master's pain as they howled ferociously and lunged at Xietain with their jaws wide open. "You really don't know what's good for you." Xietain coldly snorted and took a step forward before striking out with both fists. When his 2 fists collided with the 2 summons, the beasts exploded on the spot without even being able to howl in pain, disappearing from this world completely. Yangpei spat out 2 mouthfuls of fresh blood and began to cough ferociously, choking on his own blood amidst the yells of pain that had now turned into almost inaudible grunts. "Let's see what you do, little baby." Xietain opened the small pocket on the side of his backpack and carefully pulled out an object. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 118, 24 Hours. The object that Xietain took out was actually the small mutated plant that he had found about a week ago in the female dormitory after successfully hunting down the First Order anti-magic zombie. So far, Xietain was practically 100% sure that this plant was a treasure. However, that small percentage remaining to reach 100% was holding him tightly, and he did not dare to eat its fruits. After all, Lilith had already made it clear to him that if it was a harmful mutated plant, his body could end up exploding in a mist of blood. Just imagining the scene made his hair stand on end. The small mutated plant was still the size of a palm, but there was a big difference in its overall appearance. This was because in the past there had been 5 small green fruits and 2 slightly bigger red fruits. Now, however, there were 4 green fruits and 3 red fruits. During the time of 1 week, the small mutated plant had been watered by Xietain every day with great care, and every time he went to sleep he made sure to leave his backpack near the window at an angle where the moonlight would illuminate it. During the day, he made sure that the little plant received enough sunlight and also checked periodically to make sure that the holes in the plastic bottle were large enough so that there would be no problems. Now the time had come to see if his efforts were worthwhile or if they were in fact a total waste of time. "Lilith, do you think I should use a red one or a green one?" Xietain looked at the plant unsure, so he couldn't help but ask the most important question. Yangpei seemed to have forgotten the pain he felt when the most beautiful being he had ever seen in his entire life appeared out of nowhere like a ghost. His eyes widened in surprise and his mouth moved as if he wanted to say something, but in the end no words came out from inside it. Lilith didn't even give him a look and directly treated him as if he was even more insignificant than the air that was everywhere. She stood next to Xietain and looked at the mutated plant before looking at him and responding, "I think you should try the red fruit." Xietain nodded with a frown, "Indeed. I was thinking the same thing as you. If it's something bad, the red fruit will have the worst possible effect. But if it's something good, then it will be my loss since I will have wasted a fully mature fruit. Loss and gain go hand in hand just like life and death." Lilith shrugged and pointed. This was an irrefutable truth even before the soul record arrived on Earth, but after the arrival of this unknown entity, such truth became much more accentuated and evident. After listening to Lilith and realizing that they both thought alike, Xietain nodded silently before looking at Yangpei, but seeing his current condition he couldn't help but laugh. "You seem to have him enchanted even without looking at him, Lilith. That's why men are so boring." She rolled her eyes before looking at him with a seemingly shy slight smile and whispered, "But you look interesting to me." Xietain didn't dare look at her too much at this point. He really couldn't understand how a being could be so seductive with such an elegant body but at the same time have attitudes that a small, immature girl who had not yet been contaminated and corrupted by the outside world would have. Seizing the opportunity, he took one of the 3 red fruits carefully before stepping forward and throwing it into Yangpei's mouth. The young man, who was part of the 4 leaders of the 4 big boss camp, had not closed his mouth from the moment Lilith had shown herself. Yangpei's face changed completely and hurriedly tried to spit out the mutated fruit. But how could Xietain let him do as he pleased? With a strong punch, Yangpei was forced to swallow the small red fruit along with a few teeth in the process. Cough, you bastard. Cough, what did you feed me? Yangpei coughed fiercely and barked curses. However, suddenly his face turned completely red and his eyes rolled back before he fainted on the spot. Xietain frowned, and when checking he realized that in fact, Yangpei's temperature had risen and he was now suffering from a high fever. And now what's wrong? Bai Zemin scratched his head at a loss. His body didn't explode, but something good didn't happen either. He, that's because good always comes hand in hand with bad. Haven't you understood that yet? Lilith giggled softly and disappeared from sight, not before pointing out, tomorrow will probably show the effects of the fruit. Look forward to it. Left alone once again, Bai Zemin sighed and picked up the unconscious body while muttering, at least he didn't explode in a mist of blood. The group continued moving in a southerly direction until dusk, traveling approximately 30 kilometers before stopping as the sun was beginning to set, and riding through the night was not a good idea. Along the way, they encountered several obstacles that made the speed of the 8 buses and the Dongfang truck extremely slow. After all 9 were large vehicles, so to avoid accidents, the drivers had no choice but to exercise caution. As Luocheng pointed out, the 4 Big Boss camp was only 20 kilometers away from this place in a southeasterly direction. Therefore, before starting to move, Bai Zemin and the rest decided to take a proper rest for the night. Inside a 5-story hotel, 5 zombies staggered along the corridor. Their pale faces and white eyes devoid of the sparkle of life, along with their blood-stained teeth, gave them a grotesque appearance that no one in their right mind would want to approach. Wu Yijun observed as the 5 zombies slowly approached and could not help but notice that these creatures seemed to become slower and slower. However, it was not the zombies who became slower, it was she who became faster every time she evolved and absorbed soul power from an enemy. She opened the palm of her delicate hand and looked at the small seeds lying silently before activating her first-order plant empowerment skill. 5 small seeds glowed and under her command shot out at full speed, breaking the air that tried to slow them down. Before the 5 zombies could react, a finger-thick hole appeared in the head of each of them, killing them with ease. Li Na, Gao Min, and Fan Wu looked at their friend with envious eyes. They too wanted to be able to kill zombies like she did. Too bad, they didn't have the courage to fight. Within half an hour, the 5 floors of the hotel were cleared of all standing zombies, and the survivors dragged the bodies to the rooms on the top floor before locking the doors firmly from the outside. Soon, night descended and an important conference was once again underway. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 119. Lily. The main floor of the hotel was separated into different sections: reception, kitchen, a huge general lounge or shared living room, a restaurant, bathrooms, etc. Actually, the group had separated into 2 parts within the initial floor. The first group consisted of almost 400 people and was formed by all the survivors, regardless of whether they were workers or non-workers. Seated at several tables in the area that had been designated as a restaurant in the past, the group was currently eating their respective dinners with enthusiasm. However, although those who were unwilling to work and those who did work were together, the differences were obvious if one looked at their bowls. While the leeches or parasites had a bowl filled with white rice, those who did any kind of logistical work enjoyed rice, vegetables, and even a small piece of fresh meat. This was the main rule of the group. Those who did not want to work would definitely not starve, but they also had no right to complain and could only eat 3 bowls of white rice or gruel a day with an extra steamed bun at breakfast and in the evening. Even if some were unhappy, they knew that complaining would not bring anything good. Today a dozen people had been killed by Bai Zemin and his subordinates, so obviously it was better not to provoke them. Moreover, seeing how some female students who were rescued from the female dormitory after almost a week of starvation ate with delighted expressions the white rice which they abhorred, some smarter ones realized that perhaps they were more privileged than they thought. On the other hand, the second group was far smaller and consisted of just over 10 people. In the living room of the hotel, separated by a double door from the restaurant, was a large wooden table that had been moved to the center of the room. On the table were all kinds of delicious dishes: fried evolved beast meat, vegetable and meat soup, rice, noodles with different sauces, sautéed vegetables, baked fish. There were even 5 big bottles of soda for everyone to help themselves at will. The difference between what this group of people ate and the food of those outside the hall was so great that there was no comparison to begin with. Sitting at the head end of the table, Bai Zemin looked at the people present one by one: Shangguan Bing Shui, Chen He, Wu Yijun, Fu Xiefeng, Kai Jingyi, Zhong De, Kong Lan, even Gao Min, Fan Wu, and Li Na were present. although the latter three had no right to be present, because they were good friends with Shangguan Bingshui and Wu Yijuan. No one said anything about it. After all, it was natural that as leaders they had privileges, and bringing a couple more people was not a problem, considering their current rations. For example, if Bai Zemin wanted to bring a couple of friends for dinner here, no one would say anything about it since it was his right as someone who fought at the front and as the group's main fighter. I'd like to hear what opinion you have about the information we got today from the mouths of those road thieves. Bai Zemin finally broke the silence, initiating tonight's main topic. I think we should try to communicate with them somehow and cooperate. Chen, he proposed in a serious voice, I'm sure if we show the strength of our group, those guys who call themselves four big bosses will have to change their attitude toward the survivors. Chen he, are you crazy? Wu Yijuan looked at him in shock and shook her head without hesitation. Those men abused several women as far as we know until now and have even killed innocents just because of the slightest disturbance or discomfort. How can we cooperate with people like that? Kai Jingyi also shook her head and disagreed with his proposal. Not only that. Today we killed several militants of the four big bosses camp group. I don't think they will take the matter casually. Hearing the reasoning of the two women, Chen He became silent and fell into deep contemplation as he somehow realized that the passive and friendly encounter he wanted would not work so easily. Finally, Shangguan Bingshui also expressed her opinion. I think we should sneak in, pass ourselves off as normal survivors, and study the place before deciding what to do. Kong Lan nodded in agreement and pointed out, although our group is strong, we can't forget that they have over 50 men armed with modern firearms while we only have 5 Type 54 pistols with less than 40 rounds of ammunition in total. It would be better to be a little cautious to prevent major problems. Bai Zemin tapped his finger on the table softly as he fell into deep contemplation before looking at the person standing behind him as if she were his personal servant. What does it look like to you, Lily? Everyone's strange gaze fell on the woman of seemingly average appearance, but with a bombshell body that could not be hidden by her baggy dress. This person was, of course, Lilith. She had suppressed her charm as much as possible, and her beautiful face had been changed to that of a slightly above-average woman before showing herself to everyone. The explanation was simple, and Bai Zemin said that she was a solitary survivor who had hidden herself in the hotel storeroom, where there were a few food reserves. However, everyone found the closeness with which the two acted very strange, considering that they had only met a few hours before. Still, no one mentioned anything about it and no further questions were asked despite the suspicion. Although Lilith had the appearance of an average European woman, her charming aura as a higher existence could not be completely suppressed. Therefore, no matter whether it was Chen He or any other male survivor, everyone secretly stole glances at her. Before I answer your question, may I know if you, Master, intends to take control of the four big bosses' camp or simply try to cooperate with the three leaders? Lilith, who was currently acting as a survivor named Lily, asked in a respectful voice. Bai Zemin almost choked while drinking a glass of Sprite when he heard the way she referred to him. The others couldn't help but give him strange looks, and Shangguan Bingshui looked at him as if he was a pervert. Secretly gritting his teeth and ignoring the strange looks he was receiving, he replied in a normal voice, I want to take control of the entire camp. From firearms to supplies and survivors. Everything. Everyone's face changed slightly, the exception being Wu Yijuan and Shangguan Bingshui, who had a look that suggested saying, it turned out that way in the end. On the other hand, Fu Xiafeng and Zhong De looked at each other and could not help but smile while sighing in relief. Since Bai Zemin decided to conquer the place, once he tasted the feeling of ruling, it was highly implausible that he would surrender to the old Chinese government. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner in the Apocalypse. Chapter 120, Infiltrating into the Human Camp. I see. Continuing in her role as Bai Zemin's personal servant, Lilith thought for a moment before explaining her idea. I think the two ladies' words are correct and the best option is to infiltrate. Pretending to be an ordinary survivor, you can not only get information about the important checkpoints that need to be attacked first, but you can also gather manpower from the inside. That idea is great. Shangguan Bingshui's eyes glittered and looked at her appreciatively. If what that man named Luoqing and the rest said is true, then many survivors must be unhappy due to the way they are treated by the camp leaders but without receiving proper food. If we can bring them to our side, they can certainly be of much help in case of need. Bai Zemin remained silent for a minute or two until he finally decided, then so be it. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, Fu Xiefeng and Zhong De will come with me to the 4 big bosses' camp and we will pretend to be survivors to study the area before finally launching an attack to take control of the village. Shangguan Bingshui frowned and asked in confusion, "Why only the 3 of you?" Bai Zemin looked at her for a moment and replied in a flat voice, "You, Wu Yijun, and Chen He are no good." "What do you mean?" Wu Yijun looked at him with a playful smile, apparently already knowing the answer. "You would attract too much attention." Bai Zemin shrugged and said casually, "You two are 2 beautiful women and Chen He is too handsome. On the other hand, Fu Xiefeng, Zhong De, and me are just average at best and won't attract anyone's attention after a few simple arrangements." Hearing Bai Zemin's reply, Chen He unconsciously felt a little embarrassed but at the same time slightly proud because of his appearance. As for Shangguan Bingshui, she finally silently accepted his reasoning and was secretly a little surprised as Bai Zemin was not praising her on her appearance. He was simply stating facts with complete indifference. Even if she didn't particularly care about her appearance, Shangguan Bingshui was a very smart woman and naturally knew that to men she was beautiful to the point where she sometimes appeared to be dazzling. Therefore, it was a rarity for someone not to praise her or actively try to court her. For a split second, she even thought that maybe they could be friends. "You think so?" Wu Yijun stared at him and said with an honest expression, "I think you're quite handsome if we're talking physically. Especially lately." Bai Zemin chuckled and shook his head, reluctant to comment on the matter. He knew better than anyone that his appearance wasn't dazzling by any means, but it wasn't bad either. It was just that he didn't think a beauty like Wu Yijun, who had seen handsome men like Chen He since she was a child, would think he was handsome. Lilith looked at him from behind and secretly laughed. Bai Zemin might not notice it himself, and even for the people around him, it would be different to notice it as the gradual change was hard to see. However, she could notice how very slowly his appearance improved little by little. The more he leveled up, the more it improved. The reason Wu Yijun said that especially lately was due to Bai Zemin's jump to first order, a great milestone for any existence. During dinner, they discussed a few more details, and when everyone had eaten their fill, they went to sleep comfortably. For the first time in half a month, everyone had beds to sleep in, so practically every survivor went to sleep with a smile. Something that used to be normal could now bring them so much joy. This was another proof that human beings really didn't know how to enjoy the small details. After a refreshing night's sleep after such an eventful day of riding in which they were even threatened by a group of militants with guns, all the survivors inside the hotel woke up and the people in charge of food began to prepare breakfast. Since the site was approximately 20 kilometers away from the village where the 4 big bosses' camp was located, all activities that required going out were ceased to avoid being noticed. As for Bai Zemin, he was currently sitting in the back seat of a pickup truck that had been taken yesterday from the militants. Driving, Zhong De had a stoic expression as most of the time, and Fu Xiefeng, who was sitting in the passenger seat, looked nervous as he constantly rubbed his hands together while looking out the window cautiously. All 3 wore tattered clothes with dusty faces and disheveled hair. The stink was so unbearable that they looked like someone who hadn't bathed for at least a week, and if it wasn't for the fact that the 3 of them had already gotten used to the nauseating smell of blood and organs every time they killed zombies, they couldn't have endured it for that long. No matter how much one looked at them, they definitely looked like wanderers, survivors who managed to evade being eaten by sheer luck and coincidence. After about 30 minutes, Bai Zemin looked ahead and ordered, "Zhong De, stop the pickup truck here." Without hesitation, Zhong De stopped the pickup truck at the edge of the road next to a small building. Bai Zemin got out, followed by the other 2, and they entered the building. He hid most of the contents of his fat backpack before taking a large plastic bag and putting in a small bag with 300 grams of rice and a carton of milk before stepping out again and continuing the ride south. 10 minutes later, Bai Zemin narrowed his eyes and saw that 100 meters ahead there were several wooden fences surrounding a small village as well as what appeared to be a watchtower about 5 meters high constructed with wood. 2 militants who were joking with each other without much concern seemed to be the custodians of the gate. Hearing the sound of the approaching engine, the 2 immediately became alert and raised their guns. "Stop the vehicle and get down slowly or else we will shoot," one of the militants shouted loudly. Zhong De looked at Bai Zemin and seeing him nod slightly stopped the vehicle gradually until it came to a complete stop about 10 meters far from the entrance to the village. Fu Xiefeng, you talk with them. Bai Zemin ordered and got out without waiting for a reply. As he got off the vehicle, he narrowed his eyes slightly and realized that the firearm in the militant's hands was actually 2 Type 79 submachine guns. Although it was an old weapon that began to be mass-produced in the year 1983, it was a relatively powerful gun as it was capable of shooting up to 1,000 rounds per minute. Of course, this would only be possible if it were not for its 20-round magazine capacity. Still, with 2 Type 79 submachine guns at the forefront, even Zhong De and Fu Xiefeng could die if they were not careful.